I'm Chili Dilly, the personality pickle. Packed in a jar for the freshest flavor. Served cold in a sack for you to savor. So dainty to eat, no muss, no fuss. An ideal snack for all of us. Crisp, tender, and tasty with a bit of spice. Buy one now. Taste how nice. Snack bar clerks will knock themselves silly, speeding your order for a real Chili Dilly.
It's another week and another round of box office battles, another category for box office battles with Greg and Eric. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for our regular listeners for tuning in, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook Live, or Twitch. Tonight we got an interesting one.
We just got done crowning the worst
Yes, we did.
of all time, and now we're back watching two more shitty movies. No, I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, we had a lot of fun with the worst bad movies, and like the way this goes with box office battles, we kind of crowned a surprise winner / loser in Tiptoes, which could have gone any way. Those movies were bad, and we'll eventually do that category again because it was fun.
I thought The Room was the winner of the worst movie.
I thought it was Tiptoe. I can't remember.
It was The Room.
Oh, okay. Well, see there. They were all so bad.
Holy hell. Last night we were having dinner before Eller's soccer game.
Oh, you're right. It was The Room, yeah.
With some family. And I for whatever reason, I brought up Tiptoes and acted like it was a really good movie to see if I could trick my brother-in-law into watching it. I was like, yeah, it's got Gary Oldman, and it's a real heartwarming story about Matthew McConaughey and his struggle for acceptance in the world. I mean, I hope he watches it and then comes back to me and is like, what the fuck, dude?
That would be awesome. Yeah, I totally forgot that. I was thinking about it tonight, and it was 2 weeks ago we did our final four of the worst movies, and I honestly couldn't remember. I talked myself into that we had picked Tiptoes when I was thinking about it, because I know it was a hard debate, and it was which of these two would you never ever want to watch again? And that was what I think what it came down to was The Room is something that I may tell somebody to watch, but I don't know if I'll ever watch it again.
It was just the feeling that I got. All of the movies were bad, and I think a case could be made in a million parallel universes for Battlefield Earth or Tiptoes. Any one of those three, The Room, Battlefield, or Tiptoes, really have a strong, more than the other five we watched, strong contention.
I agree. Very, very bad.
The visceral reaction of The Room is what tipped me. So you guys, if you haven't checked that out, listen to that episode. That was a really fun one. Your buddy from the Army, no, the Air Force.
That's okay. That's okay.
Was
we were the smart branch, so yeah.
Yes, the brainiacs flying airplanes. Now, I watched a movie recently where they kind of made it seem like any old idiot could fly a Harrier jet in with just a couple of days training.
That's just a simulator.
So,
movie I don't know. Yeah, that's actually a training manual that we use in the Air Force to learn how to fly. Is just watch Battlefield Earth and you're good to go.
Perfect. Well, I am excited to do this one. We thought that we would fall back to our serious cinematic side and watch some David Lynch films for all of you fine people.
Well, first of all, let me say hi to Mike Florida and our regular crew that join our live stream, and thank you to all of us that all of you, not all of us, all of you that are listening on our streaming platforms, on our podcast platforms, as Amazon Music and Spotify and many others, Apple Podcasts and so forth. Thank you so much. Continue to recommend the podcast to other people. Share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And the information's right there on the live stream. And for those that are listening, You can email us at boxofficebattles@gmail.com, or you can go to Twitch at Box Office Battle Pod, or you can tune in and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Box Office Battle Podcast. But do want to say hi to our regular listeners. They're with us each and every week. Criplius is in the house, and he's got a good evening with a capital.
We know who Mike is. Mike is Mike Leblanovitz.
It is, yes.
Mike, you can email us if you want us to edit that out at the.
Yeah, if you don't want your name used. So
put out there. But do we know who Criplius is? We know.
Yes.
Do we know who that is in real life?
Yes.
Okay, you can tell me later. Maybe they don't want their biz out
yeah,
there.
I don't want to give anybody's real name out if they don't want. But we have some regular listeners in the house, and tonight is going to be really interesting because we did the bad movies, and these movies are, I would say, divisive to a lot of people. These movies aren't for everyone.
I think they're divisive over time. Everything I read of both of these movies was like pretty well panned by audiences and critics alike upon their release, and then they've gathered a bit of traction as far as being respected or seen as maybe more groundbreaking than they were. So it'll be an interesting conversation. Of course, I, unlike you, wasn't really part of the movie going public. Definitely not in 1986.
Right.
Because you'd have been about 30 at that time. I was just, I was 9.
Yeah, I was 15, actually. Yeah, 15.
But so, yeah, this was definitely the first time I'd seen either of these. Well, it'll be the first time I've seen any of these David Lynch films.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. You're in for an experience. I don't want to say treat. You're in for an experience. Whether you enjoy it or not, we'll find out tonight, because these first two are pretty indicative of David Lynch's films. And that's what we're doing as our next category, is David Lynch's best films. We took 8 of his best films. The only one we really left out was Dune, and only by a narrow margin, because there's 2 different versions. There's one that was just chopped all to hell by the studio, and then the director's cut, which is long, and I enjoy it, but it's not for everyone. So we're doing these films here that you see here. We've got Elephant Man at number 1. We have The Straight Story at number 2. We have Mulholland Drive at number 3. Blue Velvet at number 4, and Lost Highway. That's what we're doing tonight. At number 6, we have Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, which is a big favorite of Don't Panic's lead singer, Ted Felicity Rob's brother. He also did a song. They did a song called Fire Walk With Me, by the way. Interesting fun fact. And then Eraserhead at number 7, and Wild at Heart at number 8. But tonight is about Blue Velvet and A Lost Highway with David Pullman and Patricia Arquette. And that's the one we're going to start with is Lost Highway. So getting into, I actually watched them in reverse. I watched Blue Velvet a couple of nights ago, and I watched Lost Highway last night. Now, I had seen Blue Velvet. I didn't see it in 86 because I was 15 and I didn't go to independent or underground films in 86. I really could care less. It wasn't until I got into my kind of 20s where I started experimenting, grabbing stuff at the video store that I normally wouldn't get. And it looked intriguing. And I remember when I first watched it, it was at home. And it was back in the day before widescreen or letterbox. So it's just in your square TV. And it was just, it was not, it was okay. It was an interesting experience. I had to figure it out. I enjoyed it much more with the widescreen as I did with Lost Highway. I thought Lost Highway, seeing it now, well, in the 90s when I saw it, I think we got it, we rented it on DVD, something like that. And I was intrigued by it. I thought it was pretty fascinating, but I enjoyed it more the older I get. I enjoy these films. I think, like you were talking about with David Lynch, when they initially come out, there was a lot of people who didn't understand him as an auteur, especially back to Eraserhead. A lot of people didn't get David Lynch because it's bizarre. It's interpretive, it's artistic, and that's not for everyone. And that's what this category is going to kind of flesh out for a lot of people that aren't familiar with his work, is kind of get exposed to these types of films and these themes that are in these films.
I chose, as you did, Blue Velvet to watch first, simply because of the 2 and maybe not of the 8, but at least of these 2, you made it seem like that one was a little more accessible for
Yes.
the hoi polloi, of which I am a noted member. So I, I think we have a deep human desire, not just in movies, not just in, the art that we see, but the stories that we hear, the life we live. We have a desire for things to make sense in a linear fashion.
Right.
We, if time is a construct, as they say, we did that on purpose. If time's a human invention, we did that on purpose so that we could mark events as they happened and we could look back on them or look, towards an unknown future and have it kind of wrapped up in a pretty little bow, in a box with a pretty little bow, because our brains, which were meant to be inside of our bodies as we lived inside of caves, as we gathered berries to eat, were not meant for what we put it through today, I don't think.
Yeah.
So it can be a little unsettling when you get into art, movies that really start to challenge what that is to us at a biological, physiological, human level.
Right.
So I kind of went into it hoping to set that part of it aside and to tell myself, you don't have to get it, you just have to watch it.
Oh, yeah.
And
Good way to approach
maybe
a Lynch film.
as you watch it, it being one of these movies in its entirety, or as you watch it and then watch the others, maybe you'll start to, kind of like anything, repetition can kind of breed being better at something, developing skills, and maybe for someone like me who is a moron,
Yeah.
maybe watching multiple movies like this can kind of get me closer there. I was happy to have started with Blue Velvet, because I think it made, since we're starting with Lost Highway, I
Yeah.
think it made my experience with Lost Highway even more enjoyable than it would have been had I done them the opposite way. And what I mean by that is I already had dipped my toe into the water of what this was going to be like, the experience, and with Blue Velvet. And so with Lost Highway, I was able to kind of immerse myself, fully jump in. And I got to say, I really, really enjoyed Lost Highway.
Oh, cool.
I didn't know if I would. I don't want to say I didn't think I would. I didn't know
Right.
if I would.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily enjoy being challenged in that non-linear way.
Right. Yeah.
I can't say that I loved Inception. I can't say I love Memento, movies of the ilk
Yeah.
where time is bent or reality is
Right.
bent in that way. But I found Lost Highway to be really accessible in that regard.
Wow.
The timeline is bent, but I do believe that you can enjoy it in spite of that. So what are your thoughts on Lost Highway, just kind of from a representative nature of what a David Lynch film is like?
It's one of the most challenging, I will say, of all of his films. Mulholland Drive is to me is a masterpiece, but it's also equally as challenging as far as the narrative. And when you talk about non-linear storytelling or fractured storytelling, I think he called this Lynch himself called this movie a psychogenic fugue, if that makes any sense. Fugue is when you've got two things swirling around each other, each telling a different type of narrative. And that kind of describes this movie, because if you look away and you're not paying attention, you'll miss a key element that might help you understand what the hell is going on. But it's funny when you bring up like cave paintings. When we were cavemen, stories are told in cave paintings on cave walls in order. That's the way our brains work. Grok go out with spear. Grok hunt buffalo. Grok kill buffalo. But could you imagine if they did cave paintings non-linear?
Yeah. Well, the Bible, which, millions, billions of people on earth, subscribe to this, school of thought, starts with in the beginning.
Yes.
We need that. Biologically, we need it.
Yeah. I don't have a hard time with nonlinear storytelling if I know that going in. So when I first saw Pulp Fiction, I was blown away, and I really appreciated the out of context that you get, and then it all comes together. And that was like the first movie that I really appreciated with that type of storytelling. But it did set me up for movies like Lost Highway, which is not so much nonlinear as it is non-cohesive to the outside eye. It is cohesive if you look at it the big picture and you just let it unfold and you're not trying to figure it out, because it throws some curve balls at you. I mean, the midway point.
Yeah, it's a good point. Maybe it's not nonlinear, and I kept going back to unreliable narrator, but that's not really it exactly either. I think the freedom that you'll derive from probably this group of 8, and I mean you, the listener, or you, someone watching these for the first time, is again giving yourself permission to not have to figure out what did the author or what did the creator mean, because what if they didn't mean anything? And David Lynch, publicly anyway, states that he didn't mean necessarily anything. It's up to you. If you'll give yourself that grace, that whatever you come up with is a suitable explanation for what you just saw, it's open to your interpretation. What do the lyrics to Imagine by John Lennon mean to you?
Right.
Doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what John Lennon meant when he wrote it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And but we don't give ourselves that permission enough. And so it felt really freeing.
Yeah.
Again, I think having Blue Velvet as a background really set me up for going into it with, like, I don't have to know everything. I don't have to pause it every 15 minutes and look at a Wikipedia entry about the plot to make sure I'm got it exactly right. Just go into it, let it be a thing you're watching. And from that point of view, unreliable narrator-ish, an uncohesive timeline-ish.
Yeah, it's a really good point when you say unreliable narrator. I get what you're saying. David Lynch lets you figure it out. Not everything, like most movies, like you said, as a consumer of cinema, we feel that we need our stories spoon-fed to us in a lot of ways, in a lot of films. You go see a Marvel movie, they lay everything out there. Heck, you go see a horror movie, they have to tell you the killer's motivations. He was abused as a kid or whatever. So we need that stuff spoon-fed. And David Lynch's films, and one of the reasons they're so appreciated for what they are, is that you don't get spoon-fed. You have to figure things out. So for those of you who haven't seen it, or that plan to see it, well, we're going to do spoilers, so just know it if you haven't seen it. But it's important to discuss the themes behind Lost Highway and Blue Velvet, how they pertain to cinema overall. So it starts off with Bill Pullman, who plays Fred, who is a jazz saxophonist who has issues. He has issues with a beautiful wife, played, I think, brilliantly by Patricia Arquette. She's outstanding in this film. We talked about her during Tiptoes and knew she was a good actress, not so much in that film. But his wife, that he feels is possibly unfaithful. She won't come to his concerts. And so he has this issue with his wife, who is Renee. And he tries to catch her. Actually, what is she up to? Is she, fooling around on him, whatnot? And so they start getting the videotapes in the mail. and they start putting the videotapes into the VCR, and it's somebody filming the outside of their house, and then eventually somebody's inside of the house, and they need to call the cops to figure out what's going on. Cops do an examination, can't see anything wrong.
Don't give a shit.
No, not really. It was just kind of funny. And then they go to this party with a friend, and it seems a little sketchy. The friend seems a little bit familiar with Renee, and then he meets the well, this is the one with the cops who are just hilarious. The two police officers that come to check everything out, and then they go to the party, and you end up with meeting the Robert Blake. Yes. So you meet Robert Blake at this party, who's just affectionately known as the Mystery Man. Very creepy individual.
I knew nothing of Robert Blake except that he murdered his old lady at some point after this movie came out.
Yeah.
I got chills watching him on screen multiple times. I mean, literal shivers.
Yeah.
This was, I mean, I don't know anything else about Robert Blake. This was brilliant.
Robert Blake was famous for playing a TV detective known as Beretta that was fashioned after the Al Pacino movie Serpico. That's what he was known for. And for this was like one of those departures where he threw himself in. It was his last role. He threw himself into it, and he's genuinely creepy. And he tells Bill Pullman that he's been invited to his house. In fact, he's at his house right now. Has Bill Pullman call his own home phone, and Robert Blake, the Mystery Man, answers the phone while he's standing there in front of Bill Pullman. So now you know your brain's starting to get twisted a little bit. Long story short, there's some other nuanced things that happens, but the long story short, that Bill Pullman gets another videotape, puts it in, and it's his dead wife, Renee, has been brutally murdered, and he's there amongst it. And it turns out that Madison has killed his wife, and he goes to prison for it. I mean, the prison scene, which I kind of appreciated, was very quick. They don't do the court. He just, bam, you're in jail. And next thing you know, Fred is behind bars, and he's dealing with the death of his wife. He's not sure if he did it, doesn't remember doing it, but apparently he's guilty.
He's having a hard time here. And it's probably not worth hypothesizing too much about, what we believe to be, because again, we want this to be a freeing experience. But it would be easy to see, I suppose, if one wanted to argue that as he becomes more and more unstable,
yes,
so does this movie. Now, whether or not you want to put 2 and 2 together to equal 4 in this case or not, you could or couldn't. That's the beauty of it.
Yes.
But that is definitely, if you take a snapshot in time, no pun intended, at this point in the movie, it has been weird and it has been unsettling.
Yes.
But from this point on, it gets really weird and really unsettling. But again, just about the time that he's having a mental breakdown, or fugue, because as I recall from watching Breaking Bad, one of the main plot points was Cranston's character pretending to be in a fugue state. As he's wandering around in his underwear. That was a big, and I think that was the first time I had ever heard the term fugue state to mean you've kind of escaped out of your own mind or whatever it means exactly. So I think that parallel, noticing that was helpful, that as things start to make less sense to him as a character in this movie, the movie itself starts to make less the movie makes less sense. I feel like you have to, the events of the movie start to make less sense. The movie doesn't make less sense.
The movie came out in 97, so spoiler alert. He goes into these like convulsions. He begins to have a dreamlike sequence, which is kind of a nightmarish sequence. And then the next day, when the guard checks his cell, He sees something strange, goes and gets the warden, and wham bam, it's not Fred anymore. Fred is gone. He's left the cell and been replaced by Pete. Fred becomes Pete, which is played by Baltazar. Can't say his name. Baltazar Getty. Thank you.
Balls in ya bunghole, I think.
Yeah. Played by, so that's who's in the cell, is a guy named Pete Dayton. And that's when you start to go, okay. I was watching a perfectly fine linear film about a man who was jealous of his wife, thinking she was cheating on him, and he kills her. And now he's transformed into an entirely different character who's younger, more virile. And of course, the police can't keep him there because he's not Fred, so they turn him loose. And he's given back to his parents. The brief cameo by Gary Busey. He gets reunited with his girlfriend, goes back to his job at the mechanics, at the garage where he works. Is he Manly garage where he works, I guess, if you want to say that. Which is interesting because his boss is Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
I
was surprised to see Richard Pryor show up.
He's got a couple of good scenes. It's his last film role before he passed away. And so he's got it all. He's got a great girlfriend. He's got, job in a garage. Everybody seems to love him. And it's like, where is this movie going? And just when you think that it can't get weirder, here's the scene with Gary Busey, his mom and dad and his girlfriend. Just when you think it can't get any weirder, Robert Loggia, who is playing Eddie, shows up, and he's a gangster that wants he likes Pete, wants him to work on his car, takes him out, loves the kid. But then eventually you get to meet the girlfriend of Eddie.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, exactly. Oddly enough, it's Patricia Arquette. Now she's a blonde.
Yeah.
And now
she's not Renee anymore.
Not Renee. Now it's Alice.
Yeah.
So what is going on with this film where it doesn't even continue the original storyline of the murder? It just shifts gears into this whole nother story halfway through.
It seems to me that it shifts gears from a fragile man, older man who isn't quite sure that his partner wants to be with him.
Right.
And, he doesn't trust her. And now we have a protagonist who's, like you said, young, virile. At this point in the movie, the new Patricia Arquette, Alice, basically throws herself onto him.
Yeah. Goes right after him.
And so who among us in our minds wouldn't wish to be younger and fitter and more handsome, stable, with women throwing themselves at us? Now, again, that's my interpretation of this, is that within Fred's mind, this guy represents at this point all the things he's not, but he can only keep it together so long, because even in this timeline, even in this life of, what's his name, Jake, Pete, even in the life of Pete, well, it starts to unravel, of course. We find out that Loggia in some way is connected in an underworldly, seemingly way, mafia-ish. He also does not have much patience, Greg, for
he has an issue with
tailgaters. And him saying, buy a fucking manual and read it. You know how many car links you're supposed to be behind someone? 6 car links. That's 150 feet.
That is honestly one of the best moments of the film, because it's one of those things where when he yanks the guy out of the car for tailgating him, that one of the things you want to do. That's classic road rage. But Loja is one of these guys that can just get away with it. He plays these type of characters so exceedingly well. And, you know, if you've read any of the trivia about this, he wanted to play Frank Booth in Blue Velvet. And the story goes that he showed up at the audition, waited for 3 hours, and to find out that Dennis Hopper had already been cast as Frank Booth.
Oh.
So David Lynch comes out to tell him, hey, sorry, Rob, I already cast Dennis Hopper. And Loja cursed at him for like 15 minutes. Well, thanks for letting me know. I'm out here for, 3 fucking hours. It just went off on him. David Lynch never forgot it. And so when it came time to cast Eddie in Lost Highway, Loja immediately came to mind. He called him up. They didn't even talk about the previous incident. He just hired him on the spot. So yeah, the thing about Pete's character is he's everything that the previous Fred, thank you, that Fred was not. There's the scene in the opening part of the movie where Fred is making love to his wife, to Renee, and he can't keep it up. He's totally distracted and he can't get it. He's older, he's just come off a gig, and she tells him that's okay. And did you catch the little pat on his shoulder?
Yeah.
Like, there, dear. It's okay that you can't pleasure me. And he rolls over and he's just, you could see how defeated that character is. And so you combine that with his insane jealousy and homicidal thoughts. And so you're pretty certain that it's one of those things, like when you start seeing Pete in the cell, you start to question the movie itself and go, okay, is this Fred? Is it in his brain? Is he dead? Is he ever been in prison at all? Did he ever kill Renee? Does this go back to the beginning of the film? You really don't know. And that's like when we talk about it, David Lynch doesn't give you the roadmap. He just puts you on the highway, no pun intended, and lets you kind of go aimlessly to figure out what is going on. But there's clearly definable themes here where when you see Alice come into the picture and it's the same, his wife, he's already got a beautiful girlfriend, young girlfriend, but you see his wife, and she's kind of a representation of how he saw Renee, who was demure and very polite and honestly probably wasn't cheating on him, was just a very tame girl, but he's in his head, he's attached all of these lustful ideas that she's, going out, screwing everything that moves. Then you see Alice, and she's that embodiment of this gangster mall, and kind of gets Pete right under her spell and does the whole femme fatale thing. This movie is very much a noir film.
Yeah. You
get the Sam Spade, the Humphrey Bogart, the dark rooms, save me, the damsel in distress wanting to be saved by, her lover. So she, starts this affair with Pete, and you kind of get intrigued by where all this is going to go. And it's not going to go well for Pete.
No, and it never got the sense that anyone was going to end up happy, white picket fence by the end of this.
No.
I guess in my mind, and I am following along with what you're saying, it seemed to me that it was a little more, yes, I believe that Fred has made himself into Pete within his own mind or timeline, mind timeline.
Right.
And that, like we said, he's now young and strong, and woman throwing, this attractive woman happens to be played by the same actress, throwing herself at him. But that, so that's his frame of reference. Hers is just that I need a way out of this. I don't like doing hardcore industrial German pornography anymore. And I am glad Sean's not around to grab that piece of audio and replay it over and over. She wants out of the life. She's the one who concocts a plan later on in the film for them to rob their friend
Right.
and get out of town to hit the highway. And so I just, uh, you know, again, it's where it starts to unravel is within his own mind, he can want to be things that he isn't. But eventually, our true nature, or in this case, maybe not even his true nature, maybe his own sickness, his mental health, will always kind of eventually climb to the surface once again. You can only hide your true nature
Right.
or your, mental, health issues for so long untreated.
Yeah.
Uh, and they will make appearances over and over and over, and you will find yourself in the same predicaments, in the same emotional spaces, in the same kind of problematic
Oh,
experiences
without a doubt.
over and over. And
Yeah.
I just kept getting the sense that that's what we're seeing, is that despite your own best efforts to present yourself there are all things that we wish that we were or that we weren't,
Yeah.
that are outside of our norm. And as much as you can wish those things, just over time, they'll prove themselves not to be true. But what's great about this, I thought, Greg, was if what we just talked about, that, a person can never hide their true nature for too very long without it, coming back to haunt us. That's an easy enough film to put out there and really beat someone over the head with, as far as, that's the theme. And by the end of it, we're all better for knowing that we have to be true to ourselves. And David Lynch doesn't do that to us as an audience. This isn't a coddling piece where we are all supposed to feel better about our true nature and whatever. This is the other side of that.
Yeah.
The destructiveness of a person's true nature, of mental illness, and done in a way that's, I mean, again, I don't know if David Lynch set out to make a confusing film, but he did put us as an audience into a frame of mind, maybe not through the eyes of a person with a mental illness, but just that the movie itself is a mental illness. I don't know if that's making sense.
No, it totally does. I think it's dreamlike to some effect. So if you have a dream, and David Lynch loves dreams. He loves treating his films like a dream. So I had a dream the other night. My mom's been dead for a few years, and I was at her house, and I had to fix her furnace. And I don't know how to fix a freaking furnace, but apparently I did. But it's one of these old coal burning furnaces. Next thing I know, I'm in there trying to dig things out. A freaking pipe breaks, and then I end up with a ton of soot in my mouth, and I can taste it, that kind of thing. And it was so surreal. It just was, everything just kept morphing into something else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way David Lynch does filmmaking, is he goes with the visual that connects the story and then just keeps running with it. And in this case, I think you're right, because the character of Pete is definitely Fred. If you don't realize that, then there's no point in you even watching the movie.
Yeah.
It's with the way Fred maybe sees himself, or that he has morphed into. There is a transformation sequence where he kind of, freaks out, and then all of a sudden the next morning he's Pete. So he is this guy. And whether this is happening inside his head, inside a cell, or whether he really did get free and he did transform, movie doesn't explain it, but you can kind of guess that he's living out his life as Pete. And there was something he said I'll get to in a minute that I thought was that really opened my eyes to this movie, and kind of was like a key. Kind of wish he hadn't told me, but I'll get to that in a second. Before I bring that up, I just want to say that Pete is still Fred, like you said. And at first, Alice is a little bit like Renee. She needs saving. He's satisfying her. She's, with the things he couldn't do when he was Fred, he's giving her. But slowly but surely, Alice becomes darker. She becomes more manipulative. She becomes the exact same person he thought he was. That's where the porn angle comes into, where he doesn't even realize it when they have the scenes of her filming this, like, the bondage porn.
Yeah.
The movie's very sexualized if you've never seen it. But yeah, so then he starts to realize his wife has this porn, and you start to wonder, well, was that what Renee was doing and that Fred had a problem with? You really don't know.
Or that he just thought that she was doing.
Exactly.
Or this tendency to, and I think just in society in general, that men with a bunch of sexual partners are seen as studs, and women with a bunch of sexual partners are seen as whores.
Right.
And they're dirty, and they're not able to, or they're not allowed to have sex for pleasure, like a man is. And so, that type of skewed thinking, in my opinion, seems like it plays a role in this. That when I thought she was a damsel in distress, I was willing to go out of my way, but put my own safety at risk to save her. Now that I see that she's promiscuous or just had sex on film for money, whatever the motivation is, which we don't know. Well, now all of a sudden, I'm not quite as willing to do all that. Then he starts to have second thoughts about going through with this plan to rob the friend and get out of town. All of a sudden, I'm not quite as, into this as I once was. I wondered, and I'm very curious to hear this thing that you say unlocked something for you.
Well, it's an interview with David Lynch that he did before his death, where he was asked, I think it goes back to around 2007, that he was asked about this movie. And normally David Lynch leaves these things up to interpretations, but he was feeling a bit generous, I guess. And he discussed about his inspiration for this film. The first inspiration that he had was the opening scene where somebody hits the intercom and tells Bill Pullman or Fred that Dick Laurent is dead. And then at the end of the film, Bill Pullman, Fred, goes back to the intercom and does it. So you get this loop of, did we go back to the beginning? That came from David Lynch said he was in his apartment, and it happened where somebody did that on his intercom, actually literally hit the button and went, Dick Laurent is dead, on his intercom at his house. And he didn't know what the heck it was. Somebody had come in and said that. So he freaked out. He ran around to a window, and when he looked, there was nobody there. So he went outside there, and then he remembered his neighbor his name was also David. So he saw maybe the guy went to the wrong house. It was a mystery for him. So that was the first part of the inspiration for this film. The biggest part, he said, though, was the O.J. Simpson trial, where he said that he watched a man get convicted of brutally murdering his wife, and yet he gets acquitted, and then he gets to go out there and be free, and he's doing interviews, and he's doing television, and he's playing golf, and he's hanging with friends, and he's partying. And David Lynch went, I just couldn't for the life of me understand how an individual could commit such an act and then have this persona like he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And to me, it felt like it was a fractured mind that OJ had. And so he built this character of Pete, so similar to like OJ, where OJ's wandering around like nothing is bothering him. He's living his best life,
trying to find the real killer, which I'm not sure if he ever did or not.
If I did it, not that I did it, but if I did it.
Yeah. Here's exactly.
So it's a very fascinating, once you piece that together. Now there's still a lot more mysteries in this film to figure out. That's just the key part where it kind of lets you know you're on the right track with Pete, that Fred is the way that, Pete is the way Fred is dealing with his guilt that he's doing with all the things that have happened. It just adds to those layers of, okay, then it gets, so you get all that things are going good, and you get to the scene where Andy gets killed, the friend, as they're trying to rob him, and Alice is like totally, you know, now getting ready to throw Pete over for the murder of Andy, going to put him up. And then we get into this whole sequence where they go to the beach house, out of the house on stilts out in the desert. You bring the mystery man, Robert Blake, back in again. And now you have this massive sex scene where Pete says, I want you. And then she says, you will never have me. Walks away, and he's Fred again.
So that was going to be my question to you, because to me that seemed really significant, like the most significant thing. I mean, they do it that way on purpose, so I'm not some intellectual who picked up on something no one else did, but I just wondered if that kind of hit the same way to you, that it ties together basically everything that we have just talked about. Had she not said that, then I think it leaves it open to even more interpretation than the film already does. But that line, I mean, it's so intentional, right? Because David Lynch didn't leave any of this to chance as far as, you know, leaving something out on purpose or, you know, putting something in accidentally. So I just, you know, her saying that to him in that time, in that place, after a sex scene, it was just like wrapped the whole thing up to me.
It gets even more bizarre, because then you get the mystery man actually helping Fred kill Dick Laurent, because now Dick Laurent was Eddie, and now it's Dick Laurent, and the whole Lost Highway hotel, and you got that sequence. There's so many different, the whole ending is very dreamy as you're trying to figure out what Fred is doing, where he's going when he kills Dick Laurent. But you know, Mike Lebinovitz pointed out that, you know, that the photo with the two women is also one of those things where you see the photo of both Renee and Alice with Andy and Eddie, and it leads you to believe that they're two separate people. But then later, when they get to Andy's apartment, the cops, there's only one woman in the photo, which is Renee. So Renee was Alice. Was she a porn star? Was that what was driving Fred crazy? Were these guys? Because we saw Fred at the party with Andy in the earlier part of the film. It's the same guy. So it's so many things that give you clues. This is the kind of thing about when we're going to get into these films. So this is the first battle of the top 8 David Lynch films. And as we get into these, this is what makes these movies unique. That's what makes them fun to talk about. I got up after watching this the next morning, and I was, you know, I'm sitting there like often in a trance, and my wife asked me what I was thinking about. I'm like, I'm still trying to figure that movie out. I'm still trying to figure this out. And I watched it years ago, but this time around, I was still perplexed. I was like, so I got some of it, you know, is the mystery man. So, you know, Robert Blake, you know, he goes into this, you know, helping, you know, at the end, you know, this is the guy that was tormenting Fred. He runs into him into the house on stilts. And so you get this sense that, is he the devil? Is he the orchestrator of all of this? That he's been the guiding hand? Maybe he's that influence, because he's the one who pushes Fred into killing Dick Laurent.
Maybe it's the personification of his own mental instabilities, that instead of it being something that I did or something that lives in my mind, you want to project that as some sort of external structure or source of your own misery, bad decision making, you know, whatever it is. Could be anything. Right.
Cripps has a good comment. Why in movies and TV shows does sex work always lead to death?
I mean, it's like nature's like that, you know, praying mantises just having sex one minute, head bit off the next. You know, you can't escape it. There is no life, Greg. There's only sex and death.
Well, it is, again, it goes through these things. This is one of those films that you could really pick apart for a long time. And and that's what makes it enjoyable. That's what makes a lot of Lynch's work enjoyable. I was looking at a piece the other day, just a paper that was written about this, that does say that Lynch, it infuriates him because it's called storytelling, not story guessing. And I thought that was funny. I was like, okay, that is true. But in these and I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of people who try to do this. So this is a kind of movie that I think that The Room maybe wanted to be, that they wanted this kind of dark intrigue with the femme fatale that was just, but Wiseau was never going to be capable of writing something this nuanced. There is some flaws with the film. I think that it suffers from a little bit of slower pacing. So there are some lulls in the first half. I don't know if it needed to be 2 hours and 15 minutes. I know that there was some lulls in the first half that it could have been trimmed a little bit, but I'll forgive that. It's just a pacing thing but that's noir. I'm used to that with film noir. You've got to if you're going to go watch this film noir, you got to understand it's setting a mood, it's setting an atmosphere.
Yeah.
So other than that, I mean, there's some minor things as far as continuity, because not all the mysteries are laid out where you can easily pick them apart. It's something that you have to continue multiple viewings and even then you're not going to be sure if you're right, because the thing about Lynch is he's not even sure what he was writing. He just liked the ideas and presented them. The dream sequence with the smoke coming up from behind the partition, who knows what that meant? Whether it's a representation of hell or what it is, who knows?
You were about to get to it, I think, and I feel probably similarly to you. There are movies that I rewatch.
Yeah.
But it's because they're comforting to me, because I know that I like them, or I know that I can enjoy them without having to pay total attention to it.
Right.
I don't ever watch movies again because I think I'm going to gain some new insight into the movie, because most movies, like we already discussed, are told linearly. They are storytelling. They have a beginning, middle, and end. And generally speaking, the movie wraps up, even if it's not to the audience pleasure, or what we would prefer, but usually there's an ending that kind of wraps up most, if not all, of the story. This is a movie you could rewatch, because there's no telling if you or I would feel the same way watching it again. If you watched the movie again 10 years later, well, that's 10 years more of your own life experience and informed knowledge going into your viewing. If you watched it today and then watched it tomorrow, it might also be different, because you just saw it. You remember things, your short-term memory is,
exactly
in effect. And so you'll start to pick up on things you didn't see the first time, because you're more interested in watching a movie, and now you're interested in figuring out a story.
Right.
So I think that's a real testament to David Lynch and making this film. Now, again, I've only seen 2 now. We're about to discuss the other one.
The end scene here with him driving and evading the police, the actual going down the highway. I saw some different takes on this. Some people thought when he started to convulse that he was going to transform yet again into another identity. I've seen some people because really for me, I didn't know. I was like, okay, something's happening, and then the movie ends. And then some people said that he was finally being executed.
That is what I think.
Okay. That's that's it. They putting him to death. This has been going on in his brain.
Not only does he have whatever feelings he has towards killing his old lady, whether it's guilt, whether it's remorse, whether it's, I don't even know if I did that. And if I did, I don't know why.
Right.
The guy's got issues, and that already exists. Throw on top of that your kind of impending, mortal death, because you're going to be executed. That's a new layer of
Yeah.
stressors upon your already messed up mind. And so, yeah, I will buy into anyone's
Yeah.
idea that this was all kind of wrought out of his existing mental illness
Yeah.
as we lead up to his execution. I
Yeah.
I I think it's as good it's as good an explanation as any.
Yeah. It really doesn't matter. I mean, it's probably my favorite explanation for why he starts to convulse there at the end, that he's being 10,000 volts is running through his body.
Yeah, as
It
one
seems
might.
to be the most logical thing. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, though. With David Lynch, if you look at his past, so much of his writing is based on inspired by his own life. He always talks about things taken from him, and he was married 4 times, had multiple women over the course of the years. He's a little bit of a perv, if you be honest with you. He's and so you see in this picture with the cast looking at Patricia Arquette,
Yeah.
he got a little pervy eyes going on there. But that's what makes his films unique, is you get that kind of raw sensibility of what goes on inside a man's head. These movies are everything that could be right with a man and everything that could be wrong with men in general. They're never told from a female point of view, except maybe Mulholland Drive, which we'll get into and later on in box office battles, which is unique to me out of all of his films. Most of them are male driven, and the women are objects. They're usually generally abused, because that's a male nature. I'm not saying that every man does this. It's just in the nature. A lot of infidelity, a lot of playing 2 women, a lot of guilt, a lot of inadequacies, feelings of inadequacy. And so these are themes that we see carried on through all of Lynch's work. And I think the man himself was plagued by a lot of these things, and that's why he drew inspiration from it. I think that's why they resonate with especially with a lot of male audiences that love David Lynch's work. We can identify with these characters because it strips us down at our very raw nature and makes us see things in ourselves that we really don't want to see. And that brings us into probably, I mean, without a doubt,
segue for sure.
Yeah, without a doubt, one of the most despicable male characters in cinema, in my opinion, is in this. And you see really a story of abuse. You really see a story of degradation of the female species.
Yes.
It is breaking down. It is raw. It is heartbreaking. It's also fascinating and an amazing mystery. It's, again, another one of these films with outstanding performances and visuals that carry you along through the mystery. But damn, there is so much of this movie that is hard to watch at times.
A film noir,
and I'm talking about Blue Velvet for
Blue Velvet.
Film
noir,
moving into Blue Velvet right now for our audio only listening audience.
A whodunit,
yeah,
but made by a provocateur. I mean, pervert, provocateur, whatever David Lynch is.
A little bit of both. A little bit of both.
And yes, I mean, I was very taken by this. I've never seen a David Lynch film, as far as I know, and I chose Blue Velvet because, at the very least, the guidance I got from you was that would be the most accessible going into this, and maybe it just falls right at a 5 on the David Lynch spectrum, and we will watch some that are higher, and we'll watch some that are lower. So at the very least, you establish, kind of a basis point, and the point was established. I mean, so we have talked about this on several episodes, Greg, where it takes a certain type of artist, and
Mhm.
in this context, I'm talking about David Lynch, to tell the same story in a completely different, off the wall kind of way. And he does that very successfully in Blue Velvet, I would say. And it's interesting because you said we get one of the most despicable characters. I agree, we do. We'll get to that in a little bit. It's just interesting because you can make this movie, you can make a whodunit with a woman whose family was kidnapped, and that is part of the story here in Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
And you could just make her name Sally, and she's from Buffalo, New York, and she loves her dogs, and she really misses her family.
Yeah.
And instead, we get Dorothy, who is
Yeah.
a lounge singer by night, who is, whether through her own experiences or those forced upon her, is a masochist who cannot seemingly enjoy sex without there being trauma involved with it, alongside of it, hand in hand with it. Is that a direct product of the whatever relationship she has with, well, Frank Booth
Yep.
is played by Dennis Hopper in this,
Yes.
is one of the biggest sons of bitches you'll ever see on film. We don't know if she was like that before she met him. We don't know anything about that. All of that, I mean to say, you can tell this story in suburban America with characters who are just going about their daily lives, or you can tell it like this in the grittiest, most abusive, every character just about outside of Jeffrey and Sandy,
Yeah.
are abusive and malicious in some way to somebody else within the context of this set of actions.
Yeah.
It was very intense.
Yeah.
This
It is.
one almost to me felt more intense than Lost Highway did.
Yeah.
Lost Highway had going for it, as far as uniqueness, that what we are calling, for the sake of this show, non-linear presentation.
Right.
Blue Velvet's very linear.
Yes. Yeah. It's a very easy watch as a
From
film.
from that standpoint, it's easy.
Yes. Yeah.
From the idea that people like this could live in real life and that we may know them.
Yeah.
Without even knowing it,
Yes.
what happens behind people's closed doors or whatever, that people could be damaged in this way, that people could live a life thinking that this was as good as it gets, and we all know that it could be better. I mean, every amount of, if you have human compassion for other people,
Right.
regardless of what similarities you have with them, it's easy to be sympathetic or empathetic when you're similar. It's not always as easy when you're different. But if you have any compassion towards fellow man, watching characters go through this is tough.
Mhm.
And this was tough for me. I
Yeah.
mean, but again, that's a testament to David Lynch, what
Yeah.
he did with Lost Highway, and we've already kind of expanded on that. He gets the same benefit from me for presenting characters in this way in this film. So what he did with storytelling in Lost Highway, he did with the characters. The story's just the story in this. The story is not unique.
No, just the way it's told, like you said.
Ooh,
Man. It deliberately, like, say, the opening sequence, you get this small town atmosphere, and they deliberately show the firemen waving. This is small town Americana. Nothing bad ever happens here. And then immediately after they give you this false sense of security, Jeffrey, played by Kyle MacLachlan's father, drops down of a heart attack and it interrupts this sweet small town feeling with this trauma that immediately takes place. And then just so happens that as Jeffrey is walking to and from his father's hospital, he finds an ear, as you do.
He does, as one might. I mean, again, so all of this happens within 10 minutes. So I'm watching the first 10 minutes of a David Lynch film. And not only does he find an ear, but we have to zoom into a micro level to see the beetles sloshing around and the sounds. I was like, okay, I hope, I'm doing my best to go into this with an open mind, because that's a requirement for you and I to come in here and have thoughtful conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm going into it also with, the show in theory should be informative as well as entertaining to people. So the better that I can find something to go on a rant about or be, unnecessarily disturbed by, whatever. But I'm just sitting here going, well, I hope this is not what I'm getting into like full time, because this, I don't know how much buy-in you're going to get from me if we continue this. Now, they don't really, that piece of it, but I read a David Lynch thing where he said it had to be an ear because it had to be an orifice into what now I see as the gross mind of humanity, really, that's represented upon first glance by a grody ear with ants all over it and beetles living underneath it.
Mold on the ear. It was very disgusting.
So that's a good introduction to David Lynch. If you're not familiar with any of his work, is 10 minutes into this movie.
It granted, it's weird but it still ends up, like, when it starts, it's still just more of a mystery. He goes to the cops with the ear, they take it to the morgue. He meets the police officer, who is somebody that he's known around town. And through the police officer, he kind of ignites this friendship with Sandy, who they were never really romantic because she's younger. She's in high school. He's in college. And then they start, kind of, because he's so obsessed with the ear, you can see it right off the bat. Where'd this ear come from? Who does it belong to?
Yeah.
Jeffrey's got to know about this ear. He even says to the cop, boy, you're so lucky that you get to do this.
Yeah.
And so when he brings Sandy aboard, and she's so sweet. Laura Dern is amazing in this film. I thought she has some really great scenes in it. And, so when they bring these two together, you get this kind of Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew. It's still a sweet small town story. And it was going on at a really nice pace until he does the whole, I'm going to break into to her apartment, because I find out that Isabella Rossellini might have something to do with the ear, Dorothy, that there's an issue where Dorothy might, so they go see her perform, and then he's going to go break into her apartment to try to see whatever. That never goes well in film, when you're going to do the whole breaking and entering thing to find evidence. You never it never goes well. And it doesn't go well here, where Jeffrey ends up having to hide in the closet to avoid being caught by Dorothy as she comes back home. And then we enter in Frank. So my wife was sitting, she wasn't really watching the film. She was kind of just doing stuff and on her phone, and I'm watching it for the sake. And I didn't remember a lot of it. It's been years since I originally had seen it. Mm-hmm. I didn't remember the scene. If you've seen this film, the scene. It's probably one of the more disturbing sex scenes that you'll see or rape scenes that you will see, and it's not really graphic in terms of camera angles. It's in terms of the content of what he says and what he does to Dorothy. So when Frank comes in, and of course Jeffrey's watching all this from the closet, and as an audience you're watching it. My my wife, I was sitting there feeling uncomfortable, and my wife just looked over at me, and she didn't say a word. She just got up and then went upstairs, and she's like, I'm out.
I kept hoping that Kelsey would just continue to play her little crossword puzzle game on her phone because we were laying in bed. I was rubbing her back while we were watching the movie, and I was like, just please don't look up and ask me what the fuck, because I don't really have a good answer for it besides, I have to watch this for the show. And let this be a lesson to everybody.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, minding your own fucking business is the right thing to do. Very little of what happens in this world, if it doesn't have anything to do with you, then you need to shut the fuck up and you need to let whatever's happening just happen. Now, not every time. You can't just stand idly by while you watch injustice happen. But if you find an ear and you turn it into the police, you've done everything that anyone could ever expect from you. Because what are the odds that anybody else was going to find that ear? You've already done so much. Now, mind your own fucking business.
Which doesn't happen. We get this brilliant scene after Frank leaves where she discovers him in the closet after she goes to the bathroom, which is, just kind of a bad scene. And it's kind of one of those weird David Lynch-esque things. The last thing I would expect if you find a prowler in your closet after you've just been raped to be able to make the guy strip it at knife point
and then fillet him.
I didn't expect it. I don't think Jeffrey expected it.
I didn't expect it.
Yeah.
But again, so it's an interesting character, played by Isabella Rossellini.
Yep.
Who before this was just kind of known as a fashion model, right?
Yeah.
And so this is a big step up to go from Revlon commercials to a David Lynch film and being a one of the primes in the show. The mystery of it helps because the film kind of has an underlying mysterious oddness to it. Intense in an intensity in its oddity. And she's a part of that. And Frank, the character Frank, is a big part of that.
Yes.
So I don't wish for the sake of the movie that we knew more about Isabella Rossellini and how she ended up as such a damaged figure.
Mm-hmm.
I only wish that I knew it for my own lens.
Yeah.
Having already seen the movie, because I don't think it would help the movie itself.
Right.
It would just help my understanding after having seen the movie as to.
I can give you a little bit of an insight because
let's.
So here's what happened from my viewing experience that was kind of funny. I wasn't paying attention when I pulled the movie off of streaming, and I clicked on Blue Velvet, the lost footage.
Okay, I saw that when I was pulling up IMDb.
Yeah, and I pulled that up instead, and we started watching it. And the first scene is in a bar, and there's a bunch of topless women, and I'm like, okay. I hadn't watched the movie in a long time. I didn't know if that was the beginning or not. And then the Dennis Hopper and Brad Dourif and all the guys walk in with Jeffrey and Dorothy, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. This is the movie. It's getting started. And then my wife goes, is this the beginning? I'm like, I think so. I don't know. And then it kind of like this isn't making any sense. And I'm like, but it's a David Lynch film. So
it's not supposed to.
And then I look at the title again. I went, oh, this is like deleted scenes. So after the movie was over, when I found the regular version of the movie, watched the movie, then I went back and watched the lost scenes, which is about an hour film. There was actually the original cut of the film was supposed to be 4 hours.
Oh,
and,
okay. Well,
and 2 hours were lost. They found an hour. And it does, part of that does explain that Dorothy's husband was a drug dealer working with Frank. He was turned into a snitch. Frank found out, came to kill him, discovered Dorothy, said, I'll take it out in trade, took the husband and the son hostage to force Dorothy to be his sex slave as long as he wanted. There's also a scene where Dorothy is going to kill herself, and Frank cuts off Don, her husband's ear, and tells her that if she does decide to end her life, he'll do worse than that to Don and her child. So she's a submissive sex slave because of this. Now, do you need that exposition in the film? Maybe, but it would maybe when I watch the scenes, it does kind of drag it down a little bit. I think we could guess from what's going on that, of course, yeah, he's got her husband, got her son, for whatever reason, that this psychopath is now using this woman as a sex slave. He's beating her, he's abusing her, and she's turned into this fractured, damaged, just shell of what she formerly was, that's holding on to her son's hat and singing the song Blue Velvet because that's the song her son loved that was on the hat. And she's beyond repair in some cases.
It's easy to see that in the context of, and I hate to even call it relationship. I just mean relationship in that two characters in relation to each other. But her relationship with Frank, it's easy to see why that would be the case. I think I was more started to question all of that when, eventually Jeffrey and Dorothy start up an affair. Not an affair. I mean, they're just whatever they want. So they start an intimate relationship.
Yeah.
And she says to him, I want you to punch me, hit me. And I think it was there where you might expect someone in a situation like that where you're being, and I think it was pretty plain to see that you're being taken advantage of in a way that you didn't want. That if you were to then have a consensual sexual intimate relationship with someone, you'd want to be as far from that type of relationship as possible.
Yeah.
Right. It would be more of a comfort. It would be more of an escape. It would be whatever. So that she kind of, for lack of a better term, leaned into it. I think that's where that curiosity really started to get to me.
Yeah.
Because then you start to question, well, what is this something? I mean, Criplius says it's time to have a talk about secret kinks here in the chat. And that's funny. And I get that.
Yeah.
And I'm, a big supporter of, again, minding your own business.
Yeah.
People's kinks. I don't want to be judged for mine. I don't want to judge others for theirs.
Right.
I think the totality of our experiences as humans is going to affect every part of our lives. And that includes the way that we're intimate with other humans. And that might be different when you're intimate with someone that you love, or when you're intimate with someone who may just be a passing thing. You both are aware of that. And so the sex that you have is different than the sex you would have with someone who you truly love and care about. I'm good with most all of that when it's not abusive and doesn't.
Yeah. I don't mind a little spanking. I just don't want to be punched in the face. That's the thing.
Right.
I have my limits where the hitting comes in.
Yeah.
And Mike says kinks are weird, but this was pretty rough. And
listen, like we have BDSM
Yeah.
get-togethers where
Oh, yeah.
people really push
Oh, yeah.
way further than I would
You
be
have 'em
comfortable with. No, I don't.
We have BDSM. I thought
No,
maybe,
people have. We as a society have them.
Okay, so you weren't confessing at the time. You were.
And I'd be happy to confess it. And it's not like I haven't enjoyed a little pleasure and pain mixed together. What the
Yeah.
fuck ever. I just think, and those people will get together and really push the envelope as to what you might find comfortable physically or emotionally.
Yeah.
Right. But that exists in the world, and that's, again, none of my business. But again, it was not the relationship that we see on screen between her and Frank. It was that carried over to a seemingly consensual relief relationship, and she still couldn't be part of it.
I've seen studies, I've seen people talk about this, where if you're in an abusive relationship that ends, now this is cases that ends, then you don't have any self-worth. So when you get into the next relationship and what the previous person was doing to you, you don't feel worth anything unless this other person's abusing you. And I think that's what she's asking Jeffrey to do. She doesn't feel love or attention without being struck. And Jeffrey, in the heat of the moment, in the heat of passion, decides to indulge. But that does haunt him for a while because he's fascinated by Dorothy. I wouldn't say that he loves her. I think that it's
no
very lustful attraction. He definitely has this affection that builds, which I think his relationship with Sandy is so unique because they start off as friends and they do this really nice thing where I've got a boyfriend. I'm in love with him. I am not interested in you. I'm just interested in this mystery. But the more they get together, the chemistry starts to build between the two of them. But I want to talk about one scene. I wanted to, if I was going to do a clip, I didn't bring any clips tonight. I thought that with David Lynch, there was so much to unpack. You didn't
take it in isolation.
Yeah. But if I was going to show a clip, it would have been at the brothel with Dean Stockwell. But the problem with showing that clip is it's musical, and we would have gotten slapped with a copyright infringement.
Yeah.
But this scene with Dean Stockwell, if you know him, he was Al on Quantum Leap. Just probably my favorite scene of the film because it's so simplistic, but it's captivating. And I'm a big Roy Orbison fan. And the fact that that's the one time that I actually like Dennis Hopper in this film is when he's walking around with the cassette going, you got to play Candy Colored Clown. Got to play. He doesn't say In Dreams.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people will do. They don't know the name of a song. And that I thought was unique and interesting where he's shaking the cassette. You got to play Candy Colored Clown. You got to play Candy Colored Clown. And he puts it in the cassette. And Dean Stockwell just does this amazing lip sync performance. The interesting story behind it that I saw was that David Lynch went to Roy Orbison to ask him if they could use In Dreams in the film. And he was like, I don't really like my songs in films that much if I can avoid it. He didn't even look at the script. He's like, no. Well, that wasn't good enough for David Lynch. So he went to the song publisher and got the rights anyway without Roy Orbison's permission. And Roy Orbison did not know that he did this until maybe a year or so later when he saw the film in California and saw this performance by Stockwell and went to Lynch and they reshot a new video for In Dreams with Roy Orbison, and then they incorporated the footage from the movie and it became a hit again.
Yeah.
It's that impactful of a scene.
Well, you can choose any song or any movie, and whatever you choose kind of becomes such a part of the movie and such a part of your reaction to it that we often say, I couldn't imagine any other, it's the same with I couldn't imagine anyone else playing the role of Michael Scott on The Office, besides Steve Carell. I couldn't imagine anyone else playing. And we do that with music. But I do think in this case, choosing Roy Orbison.
Oh, yeah.
His voice is so uniquely, that
haunting
baritone into tenor that a lot of people can't pull off. That song itself, obviously, it evokes quite a reaction from Frank, and it shows us again the damage done, whatever that damage is. Again, we don't get a lot of insight into it, but based on his frequently using the word mommy, I think we might have some idea where it comes from.
It's true. That's true.
So I really was like, as cliche as it is, I couldn't imagine a better song, a better artist to incorporate into a scene like this. Because you could think of other songs that kind of could evoke that out of a character whose relationship with their mother is seemingly strained enough to create some really problematic personality traits.
It does show that Frank, it shows this side of Frank, this person who is pretty much the personification of evil. I saw some things where a lot of other people were offered the role before Dennis Hopper, and they all turned it down because the character was so, in their eyes, evil and brutal. And Dennis Hopper like saw the script and went, well, everybody hates me anyway. I'm in. Let's do this. And so he's this really over the top, sinister character, but then you get this moment when he's listening to the song later and he's singing it, and you see the emotion in his face where he's saying, in dreams I walk with you, in dreams you're mine all of the time. And you see that pain where you know that Frank has got some serious issues that he's been dealing with on his own. Not that he's a good guy, not that he's a good person, it's just that he's like everybody else. Somebody did something to damage him, and now he's continually inflicting damage on other people. And I found that nuance of that whole bit and the whole brothel scene with this again, David Lynch with the typical cast of weird characters.
This almost reminds me of a Wes Anderson style, the color contrast and kind of the way it was framed. I just wish I could have pulled Frank aside and said, it's not your fault what happened to you, Frank, but it is your responsibility to figure it out. I wonder if that would have helped.
I tell you what, I don't know. I mean, the thing was that whole scene building up to it and afterwards where he takes Jeffrey on a ride. I don't know how many people have been through this, but I have, and I know other people have, where you end up in a situation with someone drinking that is completely unhinged. You don't know where it's going to go, but you've got a pretty good idea it's not going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be in a vehicle. I've been trapped in a vehicle with someone who is leading everyone down a path of destruction. I've been at parties with someone who has gone completely mental.
Mm-hmm.
And when you watch Frank do this in the film, it's so anxiety inducing because Jeffrey can't go anywhere and you don't know what's going to happen to him. And you realize at that point, maybe he should have stayed out of the fucking closet. It's wild, man. And so when he finally realizes that he loves Sandy, which I thought, it's kind of the thing where he's kind of backed off.
Yeah.
Whole thing. He does the whole dance thing. I'm in love with her. Everything's good. And then Sandy's boyfriend comes out of nowhere, chases them, and they end up finding Dorothy wandering the suburbs completely naked. And that's when everything kind of falls apart.
What a way to find out that the person you're developing a budding relationship with might not be exactly who you thought.
It's literally so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's so uncomfortable. Naked woman in the car. And you first, like, oh my God, let's help her, and then she's all over Jeffrey.
Yeah. I forget what she says, my secret
my
lover or something.
It's unbelievable. And then you see Laura Dern's face or Sandy's face. She's just like, okay. Yeah. And then when they get to the house and you see the bottom left there on the picture, just a perfect image of Laura Dern realizing that, oh, I am an idiot. This guy's a freak.
Well, that's how she felt then. It doesn't take her too long to get over it.
No.
Is good, I guess, for her
Well,
that she has a greater capacity for forgiveness than I maybe would.
no, I did find that a little odd how she breaks down and cries and tells him that she loves him and yeah, that it's all is forgiven. Okay. I guess and that's weird for me for a Lynch film to have such a really kind of a happy ending. I mean, it is dark, but this is a kind of a happy ending especially compared to Lost Highway. You know, you have the final scene, which I thought was just chillingly well done, because you don't see brutal scenes like that, where he goes to the Dorothy's apartment and you get the yellow man standing with his brains blown out.
I mean, we are 2 for 2 with like brain stuff going on. So my question to you is that what I'm getting into? And the other says, is this a David Lynch trademark where the exposed brains of the recently deceased are on full display?
So we have like I said, we have a few more films to go in these battles. You know, we've got 8 in all, so we got 6 more. And I would say of the 6, I would say at least 2 or 3 of them have some disturbing elements to them. And I don't think they're disturbing for the sake of being disturbing. Eraserhead is really odd and disturbing. You're going to be kind of creeped out by a lot of the stuff in Eraserhead. But it's not done for the sake of being disturbing. I was watching a documentary on Lynch just to prepare for these battles, and somebody said that nothing Lynch ever does is without a reason or a purpose. So if you think that there's something disgusting or brutal, there's a reason for it. And it's the same thing with like Eraserhead. When you see it and we talk about it, you'll see the same thing. Mulholland Drive has some kind of disturbing images, like that, and a little bit of brains. It's the same type of, kind of concept of this dark. I think what Lynch tries to do with all his films, most of them, because there's some the others that we're going to watch that aren't as dark. But what he tries to do is kind of bring to light the darkness in our society. And I think with Blue Velvet, you get this, and he grew up in Montana, and he was inspired to do Blue Velvet when he was a child and saw a naked lady walking down the street of his neighborhood that was out of her mind. And it traumatized him. And he had this concept of, even in small town Americana, there's a dark underbelly that few of us get to see. And that's why you get these images of the fireman waving his hand, the picket fence with the roses, the beautiful sign, but then you get the Beatles that are under
sometimes in small town America, the disgusting and disturbing underbelly is more pronounced than I just think we've watched enough, the sheriff is in cahoots with the judge. There's underlying political power that really can't be overcome in a community that small. So yeah, I totally can see that.
So I think that's what Lynch is trying to do with a lot of his films, is just kind of talk about darkness and kind of relate it to what we feel like. If we go back to Lost Highway, it's relatable darkness within all of us, especially in man, that we can experience. And with Blue Velvet, you still get that same type of masculine darkness, but this time in another setting where everything is supposed to be sunshine and roses, and we get people like Frank Booth.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I can't think of. I bet if I really had to sit down and go, well, name 10 characters in movies more disturbing than Frank Booth, I'd be pretty hard pressed. You could easily come up with some, but I don't know that you could easily come up with 10. And that was surprising to me. I don't know a lot about Dennis Hopper, but it's not just the evil, and it's not just the knowing what he's putting another human through. I mean, Dorothy gets the brunt of it, but it seems like everyone who's kind of in this guy's sphere is going to get some of this. It's the pleasure that he seems to take from it. It's the
Yeah.
unhinged. I mean, that scene, to go back to, within the first 20 minutes or so
Mhm.
of him huffing that gas with a mask while sexually assaulting Dorothy and going in between anger and rage and then
Yeah.
this odd, concerning, childlike, infantilized, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
It's
it's not just evil,
it
it's evil combined with
yeah,
unhinged.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Ugh.
I was gonna say unhinged. It is like that the don't look at me, which she says to Jeffrey when she first again. So that's that projecting of this stuff where he don't what doesn't he's ashamed of himself, and that shame again going with the mommy issues and everything else leads him to abuse. Maybe Dorothy and very likely reminded him of his mother, and you've got a whole nother layer of creepy on this. Luckily for all of us, Frank gets lured in when Jeffrey pulls the old switcheroo with the walkie-talkie and plants one right in his melon. And so there's another shot in the head. I did see that that Lynch purposefully referenced Abraham Lincoln. I don't know exactly why throughout the film, because he is there. Dorothy's apartment is on Lincoln Street. Frank's last name is Booth, and he gets one right in the melon. So there was other things too I saw that referenced Lincoln, which oddly enough, just one of those things that directors like to do with the Easter egg and themes. Maybe it's the small town, type thing that he's throwing in there with Lincoln. I don't know, but I thought that, I thought it was just another little tip of the cap that Lynch likes to do, and I enjoyed it. Overall, the film, there's so much more we could unpack with this. If we wanted to, we could go for another half an hour on both of these films. And I think that these discussions that we have on David Lynch are going to be like this. I see more of these coming. Where it's a good thing. This is one of the things I love about cinema is that there's films that we can watch purely for our entertainment. Whether it's a Marvel film or a buddy cop comedy that we watch purely, or Will Ferrell film, Ben Stiller, that we just sit there and go, I'm gonna just enjoy this. And then there's other films that you can watch by yourself, or with somebody else that's a cinephile that, then get into the nuances of it. And you can actually be challenged mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's rare. I've seen a lot of films lately that try to do it. Not all succeed, and to be as good as Lynch is, and others like him. Wes Anderson being another that is that I appreciate his films. I like what he tries to do. And there's other artists like that. I actually liked what's his name? The guy from Baltimore with the thin pen, John Waters. Pencil thin mustache. He does some very odd, bizarre films that are challenging mentally. So I think we're going to have a lot of good discussions on this. But I think this first battle between the fourth and the fifth film seeds in our bracket is going to be a challenging decision to come to, because after having the discussion, I'm not sure where I give my vote. So do you have an argument for either film?
Well, I feel the same way that you do, because I enjoyed both of these movies for different reasons.
Right.
But I had a reaction to one more than the other. My vote for this one is for Lost Highway. For a couple of reasons. One, I'm not sure I want to put myself through another viewing of the characters in Blue Velvet. Now, that is a testament to the acting and the writing and the directing. So that's not a negative thing. That's a personal preference. But secondly, I think Lost Highway, if we were to use that frame of reference, which we often do, is which of these movies would I want to see again and which one would I would not? Lost Highway gives you a lot more opportunities for growing into the movie. The more that you grow as a person or experience as a person, I think that you could watch Lost Highway and grow into that film. Um, I think it presents opportunities for nuance that you might not have recognized before. And so, and I think each of these movies had very memorable characters. Blue Velvet memorable in a much more sinister feeling way. But um Robert Blake as the mystery man in Lost Highway, I mean, multiple times, probably a half dozen, like literal, and I'm not saying as a cliche, I'm talking about
Right.
literally hair standing up or that little shiver of, holy fuck,
Oh,
man. Very rarely am I affected that way by a character in the movie. So my vote through all of that is Lost Highway. This is one where it wouldn't disappoint me, and I can see the value either way. But for me, it's Lost Highway.
And that's I mean, that's a valid point. If I think about both of them and which one I prefer as far as in pure enjoyment, I'd probably be I really like Blue Velvet from the standpoint of what we talked about from the linear film. It is a good story, but it's so dark. Before I give my vote, I do want to address one question that was put out by Criplius. He said, "Did they say what the gas was?" It reminds me of Steve Martin's dentist from Little Shop. It's a very good observation, and they do. It's out there on the net. You can check it out. It's a form of a nitrate gas. It's supposed to enhance sexuality or the sexual experience. And that was Dennis Hopper's idea. Originally, David Lynch wanted it to be helium. And Dennis Hopper said, "You don't want your lead villain to be talking with a Mickey Mouse voice, dude. Seriously."
Yeah.
And in retrospect, Lynch went, "Yeah, that was the right call." I think that it was just the initial, they wanted it to be some sort of effect where it was just to make him more menacing, almost like a Darth Vader type thing where he's huffing on the gas. But it was actually I don't think it's ammonium nitrate, but it was something nitrate, sodium nitrate or something like that enhances sexual experiences. So he takes it like ecstasy. So that's what was in the gas. So back to my vote. I'll be honest with you. I part of me wants to put it to the audience vote, but part of me really just wants to go with Lost Highway. And I will say that the pros and cons of both. Blue Velvet, straightforward story, great performances, very gripping as far as the action sequences, because you kind of didn't have to think as much with Blue Velvet. It was laid out there for you, and it kind of unfolds. There's
true.
and so you just get to experience it. Whereas Lost Highway, when I said we were getting into these Lynch films, I said they're going to break your brain.
Yeah.
And that one tries to break your brain. And I think
tried.
Yeah, I think Lynch was really fond of it. A lot of people consider it a masterpiece from Lynch, and I think that there are a couple of others that I consider greater. So I will go with you in Lost Highway because I want to see how this one stacks up against some of these other ones that are very similar.
Okay.
Mulholland Drive is one that I think it's going to be a challenge to top. In my mind, I did a paper on it when I was in college, and it's just still stands out as one of the biggest mind trips I've ever experienced. So we got Mike has got an Lost Highway is the one I want to analyze. Blue Velvet felt both super dark, brutal, but also artistic. Both were super dark and weirder than a way. I vote Lost Highway for the brain break. And so even if I had gone Blue Velvet, I probably would have just turned it over to the audience, and I think Lost Highway would have been the one. So I think that without a doubt, very close. Probably one of the closest battles we've had, because I think this could have gone either way. But I think it is this up to interpretation kind of, it's almost like, do you remember when you were a kid and you had the choose your own adventure books?
Yeah.
And you had to, like, if you want to do this, go to page 6. If you want to do this, go to page 16. That's what this kind of movie is like to me, where you kind of get to choose your own adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, if you've not seen it, for all our audiences, I know we talked about it, but you still have to experience it. We could talk about it for 3 hours and it wouldn't do the weirdness and the existential type of artistry that Lynch weaves into this film. It would not do it justice. So
well, people way more qualified than us probably have and still haven't scratched the surface of what it is. I would just and again, I kind of talked about it at the beginning. As a viewer, you know, if you're watching these for the first time, give yourself permission to be confused. Give yourself permission to not have to know everything, and especially give yourself permission to not ask yourself, what did the creator mean by this? Because it's entirely possible that either A, they didn't mean anything, or B, it doesn't fucking matter. So once I'm glad I watched Blue Velvet first. It was a great ease into this, as ease as Blue Velvet can be for such a challenging film.
Right.
But it gave me a greater capacity for, I think, getting into Lost Highway than had I watched them in reverse. And had I watched them in reverse order, I might have voted for Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
But
maybe.
The context of one into the other just really, I think, was really beneficial for me.
I think if you want to do both are really great. If you want to do a quintessential film, Lost Highway is the winner. It's more like what a lot of people consider his masterwork, which is Twin Peaks, which we'll get into eventually down the road. But our next battle coming up in 2 weeks is going to be really, I think it's going to be a lot of fun for both of these films, because they're extremely different, and one of them is not like Lynch at all. The Elephant Man, our #1 seed, and that's by IMDb score, is considered his best film. It's an exceptional film, filmed in black and white. It's got Anthony Hopkins in it in a great role. John Hurt. I watched it years ago. It's probably been maybe a decade or two since I've watched it, but it is a amazing watch. Doesn't have the weirdness that you would. He dials that back to be able to tell the story that was needed for the studio. And that's going to go up against our 8th seed, Wild at Heart. Again, this is one of my favorites. I've watched Wild at Heart a few times. It is a romp, is what I could say. A fun movie. It is a fun, wild, like it says on the movie poster, a wild ride and a must-see. Nicolas Cage at his loopiest, Laura Dern back again in another Lynch film. This is going to be a fun battle between the two. So we're going to do this on March 4th. Will be the next box office battle. It'll be the Elephant Man versus Wild at Heart. Thanks everybody for joining us in the chat. We saw the chat go really up and down with a lot of viewers tonight. So I want to thank you for coming into the live stream. You can join us on our next one, Tuesday, March 4th on YouTube or Twitch at Box Office Battle Pod. The YouTube is at Box Office Battle Podcast. Please do us a favor and subscribe if you come in to visit. We appreciate that. If you have any suggestions for future categories, you can email us at boxofficebattles, that's all one word, at gmail.com. Tell us what you think of the show. Tell us anything you want to make comments, or if you want to suggest a category future. So we'll be back then on Tuesday, March 4th for the Elephant Man versus Wild at Heart as our David Lynch continues. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Eric for the last words of the night.
Until next time, you guys remember, be excellent to each other, and we'll catch you then later on.
Have a great week, guys. We'll see you on March 4th for Elephant Man and Wild at Heart.